Hello. Is this working? Okay, good. Hello, I'm Hee-Dan Chung, President of the League of Women Voters of Scarsdale. Welcome to our school budget information session. The League of Women Voters of Scarsdale is a volunteer, nonpartisan political organization which promotes political responsibility through informed and active participation in government. The League is nonpartisan in that it does not support or oppose any candidate for public office. It is political in that it takes positions on selected governmental issues after serious member study and consensus. We are fully committed in principle and in practice to the National League's policy on diversity, equity, and inclusion. The League comments on local governmental processes, such as the school budget, to help support the democratic process of civil engagement in Scarsdale. We are so pleased to have from the school board, President Susie Hahn, Leah Dembitzer, let's see, Jim Dugan, Jim Dugan.
Amber's on as well.
And Amber Youssef.
How come I can't see her? How come I can't?
And from the school district, Superintendent Drew Patrick, Andrew Lennon, Assistant Superintendent for Business. On Zoom, Dr. Edgar McIntosh, Assistant Superintendent for Curriculum Instruction and Assessment. Jeannie Crowley, Director of Technology and Innovation, Chief Information and Data Protection Officer. Is Edgar there? No, not yeah, Edgar's there. And is Stuart there on the Zoom or no? Andrew's here though. Andrew's here. Okay, great. Eric Rauschenbach, next to me, Assistant Superintendent for Special Education and Student Services. And Megan Troy, Assistant Superintendent. I'm turning over the program to Dahlia Khan, our School Budget Portfolio Chair. Thank you.
Good morning, everyone. I'm Dahlia Khan, and along with Nan Mead. We're the school budget portfolio co-chairs for the league this year. Why is it doing that? That mic is off.
There's sound on someone's laptop.
I'm not on the Zoom. We're happy to be with you here today to discuss the 2025-26 proposed school budget. Many thanks to the members of the board and the administration for making the time to join us here today and for answering our questions that we had posed. As you know, we shared another set of questions last week, which will serve as our agenda today. While you have answered parts of these questions during the budget sessions and in your answers, I think it's so helpful to go over some of the information today to give people an opportunity to learn and ask their own questions. I also just want to start by saying I'm not going to go through each question, especially because some questions are your answers that you've been provided or the budget. So I'm just going to focus on some. Obviously, if anyone in the audience has any follow-up questions, hopefully there'll be some time afterwards for Q&A, so you feel free to ask questions.
Do I still
Oh. Okay. So I wanted to start out by discussing question number 2 on our info session agenda, which is please provide a short explanation of the budgeted gap between revenues and expenses. Please address why a gap remains after a year during which interest income greatly exceeded projections. And I'm just going to note foundation aid was also higher.
There's no secret that the tax cap continues to be a burden of school districts, right? And the pace with which inflation increases versus the cap in sources. Is there anything specific we want to?
Yeah. Should we give it a minute, see if they? Yeah. I'm just going to look. Jeannie and Edgar, can you hear us
Yes.
on this? Okay.
It's a little bit in and out.
Okay. Let me just talk for a second into the mic. Is that better or is it the same, in and out? It's good.
I can
Okay.
hear it.
Thank you. So just to recap, just in case people were not able to hear on Zoom, the first question was about the gap between revenues and expenses, and why a gap remains. You're talking about the current year, that is the current fiscal year. But let me back up and just say thank you. Appreciate the league for having us and giving us an opportunity to respond to questions and engage in dialogue. Dahlia, you signaled that some information is out there both through the questions. I just want to point people to where that is. On the Board of Education Board Docs page, we have a page dedicated to the 2025-26 budget. So that's one place you can go. You can also go to the district homepage and go to the business office, and there's a budget page there that has all of the same information. We did release the 104-page budget book on Friday to the public. There is a lot of good information in there. It does take some persistence to get through, but it does document, I think, a lot of important information that helps describe not just where we're projecting to go next year, but where we've come from. Just maybe to add to Andrew's response, this is sort of a general budget response. A budget is a plan. It's the expected, we start the process 18 months before expenditures may come to realization. So we're planning in January and February and March of, for example, this year for expenses that won't potentially come till June of 2026. So that process by its nature is an estimation process. The biggest change in our expenses from our budgeted plan in the current year is around the healthcare. So we have a self-insured health plan for our employees and our retirees. That self-insurance, we believe, we've demonstrated over many, many years that it has, in the long run, saved us money. By self-insuring, we significantly lower our administrative costs, and we get the advantage of years when claims come in below expectations, but we suffer the consequences for years when claims come in above expectations. And we are in such a year this year. So that's the primary reason why you see despite positive revenues in the realm, in the interest realm, we are also having more expenses in the healthcare area.
Thank you for that. And you noted that it's down this year. There's a bigger gap this. But I know the fund balance used to fluctuate since the 2020-21 school year. I think it's been going down each year. It's been a smaller percentage of the subsequent year budget each year since then too. Do you see a shift? I mean, it's obviously not sustainable for the fund balance to keep decreasing. I think in your projections, you have it a negative fund balance by 2027, 28. What is your plan to increasing fund balance? And then I'm just going to ask with this, and then give you a chance to talk. You mentioned the health insurance reserves. Yes, this year saw an upward trend in claims, but I think a lot of that was based on, I think that you spoke about specialty medicines, use of higher cost services. Do you see this trend continuing? And if so, how is that going to be sustainable? Because you can't keep making up the shortfall with the fund balance.
Just let me start with the fund balance conversation. I think it's important. So in November, the long range financial plan that I presented was meant to help us think about this budget making process, not just in a single year balanced budget exercise, but also how do our decisions today affect those out year projections. It is also important to note that the further out we go, the less accurate our predictions are, right? So it's our expectation that the budget we've presented that we hope the board will adopt going forward will be a new input and a new starting point essentially for the multi-year financial plan that will show an improved fund balance projection in that process. I think in terms of how we plan to address that, there is clear history here, in short-term history, where we've been using fund balance to not necessarily deal with spikes in expenditures or temporary shortfalls in revenues. We've been using them to help balance our budget. And that is the structural challenge that we've had. Now, we've been able to, in some cases, return some of those funds back to the fund balance at the end of the fiscal year, such as last year when we appropriated additional health reserve money, but at June 30th, we knew we had money left that we could put back in the reserve. We'll continue that process as we close the current year's fiscal outcomes, as well as the end of next year. But I think it is evident in my discussions with the board and our presentations at the board table that the board is cognizant of the fact that we need to be mindful of how we're using fund balance going forward. The one change in fund balance this year is a one-time use of $90,900 for one-time expenditures related to the capital improvement projects that we're looking to take on. If a bond is successful, we'll be able to return that money back to the general fund once that bond passes. So we're making decisions now with fund balance in mind over the long term. Do you want to add anything, Drew?
No, I think that covers it.
Okay, thank you. You mentioned this, the tax cap factor. Well, I think you addressed if you have anything to add then about how the long range financial plan and the fund balance and reserve plan affect the budgeting, but I think you pretty much answered that. How did the tax cap factor into the budget development? I know you stated at the beginning of the process this year that you were committed to being under the tax cap, having had a budget over the tax cap last year, but we talk about budgeting to the needs of the district as opposed to the tax cap. How do you think about that? I know this year you were committed to being below, but going forward, how do you think about it, especially with a looming fund balance deficit?
Thank you. That is a $191 million question. No. I'm not making light of it. I think this is the board kind of spoke about this, I think, on Monday night. The choices that we're going to have to face. Yes, we as an administration entered the budget development process this year with a belief that, having asked the community to support a budget that was in excess of the tax cap last year, that it would not be a prudent thing to do 2 years in a row. That we thought that it was our responsibility to come in to this process with the expectation that we would meet the tax levy cap. Andrew spoke to the inflationary pressures. That's obviously a factor, but each year is its own budgeting process, its own budgeting year. We start from the beginning, thinking about what we currently do, what we'd like to do, and we follow a process of both internal and then public dialogue around what those things are. The forces that we work within at some point demand, when we get to the point of the process where we're deciding on what a final budget is, are going to force us to either live within a tax cap boundary or, in doing so, potentially doing things differently or fewer things than we had. That's cutting expenses, or periodically asking the public what they think about what it would cost to continue doing something or add something new. I mean, that it comes down to that every single time. So I don't, my personal belief is though we entered this particular year with that mindset for, I think, very specific reasons, the board hasn't adopted the budget yet, but from the time the board adopts the budget, and hopefully the community sees that it's a prudent budget and supports it. That's obviously what we hope. We wouldn't put a budget out that we hope the community doesn't support. We turn the page and we start looking at next year. And I think we're in a better position than we have been in recent years because of the fund balance and reserve plan and because of the long range financial plan structure that Andrew has developed, help us begin that process right away. You may also remember we did make a migration to a new financial and budgeting software platform that is enabling us to, each year that we have more data in the system, is enabling us to forecast more efficiently and effectively and predictably, which gives us better information earlier in the process so that we have more time to process those decisions. Sorry I was so long-winded, but it's sort of it's a holistic process.
Thank you. So question number 6 is from a budgetary standpoint. Please explain why the district has used a self-insured plan in the past and whether it anticipates continuing to do so for the next 5 years. And as you answer that, I heard our insurance consultant, I think our consultant, speak the other day, and he kept talking about his comfort with the risk of the plan because we have reserves. And I kept thinking, oh my gosh, reserves, we're worried about our reserves. So if that's what's giving us comfort, maybe we shouldn't have so much comfort. So anyway, if you could just speak to the decision to continue with the self-insured plan.
I'll start and then hand it over to you for kind of the reserve piece of it, if that's okay. So I would say I'm not comfortable answering for the next 5 years. That's not, we need to look at this plan annually, and we do. I think if you watched the presentation last Monday night, you understand we have a standing health insurance committee that meets to look at the viability, sustainability of the plan, the claims experience, possible programs that can result in lowering costs or decreasing the rate of cost increase, lowering the rate of costing. So we're regularly, but those meetings, the question we start with in the first moment that we turn and look toward next year, the first question we say is the self-insured plan still right for us? Is it still right for the school district financially, and in all other ways? So for next year, the answer is yes. There are over the life of the plan, there's pretty compelling evidence that shows that we have saved taxpayers really millions and millions of dollars by being in this self-insured plan versus an insured product where you're paying a premium and that premium is what it is, whether folks use the service or not, or have the experience or not. I think the question will be asked again responsibly next year. I think there is a fact that your ability to make a move from a self-insured plan to an insured product is you're in a better situation if you make that move in a year when your claims experience hasn't been terrible. Like you're going to pay a premium for that if you make a move at that particular time. But we weigh all of that. We are seeking for informational purposes. We didn't have them on Monday night, but we're seeking quotes from insurance carriers to just show exactly what they would quote our population. So that is, piece of information that we'll add. Yeah, I mean, in terms of, I'll hand it to Andrew in a second, but in terms of the use of reserves, we have used the reserve. First of all, the reserve is for this purpose. The reserve is to try to smooth out those unexpected costs in the health plan that we can't account for. You can't predict everything. We have budgeted a 16% increase in the health plan for next year. So that's, I think, reflects what we think we've learned about claims experience. And so we're trying to account for that as much as possible within what's budgeted. And then the anticipated application of reserves. We'd like to be heading in the other direction where we're having better claims experience, not worse. And it's true that there have been several difficult years in a row, but that doesn't describe the entire history. I think it's a valid question. Has something significantly changed in the healthcare marketplace? It's possible that that's happened. There's certainly some evidence that post-COVID, healthcare has changed, and maybe people who've postponed getting care are further along in their disease states and need more intensive care. That would not be unique to our plan. That would not be unique to an insurance plan. Our colleagues who are in the Empire plan are budgeting a 9% increase on top of an 11% increase last year. Our neighbor Mamaroneck is also budgeting a $3+ million increase in their health budget, and they're slightly smaller than we are. It's not unique to us, and we're being as thoughtful as we can and prudent as we can about what we budget and what we use our reserves for.
I would just add that I think what our consultant was trying to portray last week in regards to how the expense projections are taking into account our district's circumstances, right? And in specific relation to the reserves that he kept bringing up is I think it allows us to be more precise in where we think the short-term trend is bringing our expenses, knowing that we do have a bit of a backstop because in those years where our projection is wrong, we have some reserves to help us there. But as Drew mentioned, we are projecting a significant increase in the budget. If we were not to assume those reserve usage, right, those budget dollars come directly at odds with other program expenses within our budget. So we're trying to manage both very, very carefully. And I think at the end of the day, we also have to acknowledge that our healthcare plan is really, just like in any business, it's meant to help attract and retain high quality professionals in the field. And our plan allows us to target benefits to the benefits that are actually being used by our staff and our retirees. Whereas if we paid for a fully insured plan, it'd be much more kind of broad coverage assumptions that we cannot tailor in a fully insured plan the way we can in a district sponsored plan.
Thank you. I just one follow up for the health insurance plan. I know we have a stop loss plan that kicks in at $300,000. I think it used to be $250 and then $300. A number of years back, we changed our carrier for that, I think, because we were dropped. And then we got a new one. Is there any concern with the level of claims that we're going to lose that, or it's going to be too expensive to get that stop loss insurance?
So stop loss is essentially reinsurance. I think that industry has taken a hit through all types of insurance in recent years. I think that 2 or 3 years ago, I think that the number of interested firms in stop loss insurance had shrunk. I think we had 3 bidders on this last year's stop loss plan. So we still had interested parties that were willing to bid on our plan based on our current coverage. So I think it is always a concern, but I think there's still demonstrated competition in that field. So we still feel we're getting a good price.
Moving to question 7, I know you answered it, thank you, but I don't want you to go through the whole response because it takes a long time. It's about potential elimination of the Department of Education. Just looking at your answer, it looks like the district would be down at approximately 1.27 million if that were to occur. As you pointed out, we have to figure out ways to reduce expenditures and or rely on fund balance. Anything more specific that you can tell us about that if that were to happen?
I mean, just so everyone knows, we get 2 primary sources of federal fund. We get a third source, a small amount of E-rate funding, which helps with internet connectivity. That's like $30,000, $40,000. That's not been in the crosshairs that much, from what I've read. Our biggest source is IDEA, Individuals Disabilities Education Act funding, about $1.1 million. And our second source is through the federal title grants. Ours is primarily Title II money, which is for professional development. I would say the Title II money, we would just be able to not do that particular professional development and move on. The much larger source funds positions. I'll let Eric talk a little bit about that.
Functionally receive about $800,000 of the $1 million we receive from the federal government through IDEA funding. The rest flows through to schools that are serving residents in preschool. So it's about a $700,000 to $800,000 hit to the special education budget. We currently offset salary with it, but that's really just a choice in ease of grant requirements. So it would be a significant hit to special education funding. With that being said, in talking in all of the writing and the talking that's out there, IDEA funds seem to have been left off the crosshairs as far as reducing of funding. So that's good. However, that can change at any point. And the question will be, is it the Department of Education and the regulatory features that are removed? And, prior to the Board of Education, it was combined with the label department, and there were block funding grants that came to local education administrations. But if it goes back to that may have a not as big a monetary hit. And then there'll be a lot of regulation change, but who knows exactly what's going to happen. So, we're thinking about that. And unfortunately, there really are only a couple of ways to address the shortfall in funds, which is a cutting of program, or a use of other funds from some other line.
Thanks. Difficult choices. I want to skip to question 9, which is please discuss the district's plan, if any, to use alternative funding sources to fund district initiatives, including but not limited to the PTAs, booster organization, parent fees, and grants. I know you've spoken about it at the meetings. You talked in particular about parent fees for the non-sanctioned sports, but even going beyond that, please discuss any plans you may have.
I think the biggest conversation has been around the athletics program. So I think we'll just talk about that first. I think Dr. Patrick made it very clear in his comments about that our first objective is to find more cost-effective ways to run those handful of programs that are non-sanctioned sports. And I think we've already had productive conversations in that regard. So we're going to continue to do that. That would offset the need for external funding sources. I think then the question becomes for the community members that partake in those programs, how would we partner together to find other sources, whether they be fundraising, booster club support, or what have you, to help cover the costs of those specific programs.
That's really big. I mean, our PTAs are incredible partners, as Maroon and White, our booster organization, Scarsville Schools Education Foundation, Friends of Music and the Arts. We have really positive partners that help us. Our most of our work with those groups is really what, for lack of a better term, what we call core plus. It's the sort of things that enhance education but aren't mission critical necessarily. They really improve the school experience for our students, but they're further away from the curriculum instruction, assessment, teaching and learning in the classroom. So we are grateful to those partners, and those priorities are really set in combination between the buildings and the PTAs and so forth. One component we do have in the budget next year is to begin what will probably be a multi-year elementary playground restoration project. Our equipment is well down the road of its useful life across all 5 of our buildings. And we have had conversations with our PTA partners, the PTC and the foundation, to see if we can find a way to share in that responsibility, where the district will contribute part of that cost, and perhaps the community can raise funds for part of that cost to accelerate those replacements. So we're kind of in an early conversation around that. The exciting part of that is that it would give us the chance to involve students and families in the design of those spaces. That it becomes not just a capital improvement, but it becomes a learning experience for the whole community, where kids really do some research and get empowered to make some choices about what they value in those play spaces. So other than that, those are really the major, maybe external sources.
Yeah, I'll add one, which is another question perhaps that you're going to go to, is the special education tuition line that we've projected an increase for this year, which is every year we budget a modest amount for empty seats in our special education program, where other districts would request to send a student to our program. We do that because we have a seat available. And it is a win for the district and a win for the sending district as well. As we've rolled out our special education program proposal this year, we've noted that there will be additional seats available, and those conversations have started. And I'll let Eric talk a minute about what discussions he's had in that area, because it is an increase in our revenue projections.
Yeah, this year we have a cohort of students both who are chronologically in the 5th grade and in the 8th grade. So they are moving to the middle and the high school respectively, our 12-to-1 program and our 8-to-1 program. Those students will require a program for next year. We've done a cost forecast that we reviewed in the second budget study session at the cost of sending students out of district for this type of program versus building our own program inside. And over 5 years, it saves us a significant amount of money on a yearly basis. In order to increase that savings, we have the opportunity in these classes to pull in tuition-based students from outside. We plan to do that. It looks like there will probably be 4, possibly 5 students coming into the district next year. Our policy for tuition really limits where tuition can be taken in by the district to students who may be moving in a culminating year, and to students coming in for special education programming. It's a regular practice amongst districts to essentially use each other's services for that type of program. That being said, the district has focused very specifically over the last 7 to 8 years about building programs that could service our students in their home district, both for financial sustainability reasons on the special class end, but also to meet the needs of a growing special education population and what I will call a wider diversity of needs that have really come to the district. And that is a nationwide and a state trend that we have seen. We have seen about a 270 student increase in the last 10 years in special education. We currently have a classification rate of 13%, about 13.8, and that is below our county and state, which is 17 and 19 respectively. And those have gone up on a similar trend to our numbers over the past years as well. With that being said, it's important that we service our students that live in our district, and doing that within our own schools is best for the students that live here. The special class particularly is financially sustainable because of the cost that it incurs as a district to send them out of district. But we also have other programs that we've expanded just because of a increasing number of special education students. And those are not students that would be eligible for outside programs, but they are students that do need more support than we had 10 years ago.
Just want to add two sort of clarifying pieces to this, and Eric, you can bolster this or add to it. So one of the questions we sometimes get is, are we creating special education programs first and then kids come, or is it the other way around? And in fact, our 8-1 class, it became viable to start an 8-1 class because the kids were living, who were eligible for that part of the continuum of services, were living in Scarsdale, and we were sending them out to a program because we didn't have one. At the point where we had a critical mass of those students living in Scarsdale, that was the point at which we created this 8-1 program. And that's one of the programs moving from elementary level to middle school level just because of age. The second thing is there's in adding the 8-1 program to the middle school to accommodate those students aging up, and the 12-1 program to accommodate students aging into the high school, those additions, those programs don't require a new teacher each year, 6th, 7th, and 8th grade. It's one teacher, multi-grade class. That's how it's structured now in the elementary level. It's a multi-graded class, maximum of 8 students. One teacher accommodates all the 6th, 7th, and 8th graders at once. So there was some confusion from people in that. Anything?
Yeah. That's similar to the 12-1, where it will be a 9-10 combined class. In our forecast, we do look at, when they move to 11th and 12th grade, the additional teacher, but it is a 2-teacher program in the high school for the entire 4 years. As the 8-1 class in 3 years from now becomes 8th graders, it will be a 1-teacher add to the high school as well, because that is a multi-yeared class. Those are for students who are alternately assessed, meaning they're not taking Regents exams. We're focusing mainly on life skills, independence. So the later years in high school are very much focused on travel training, work skills, independent living, and those types of skills. So it's a very different program than most students are experiencing in Scarsdale.
Thank you. I think the next question kind of follows from what you were just talking about, which is what specific staffing changes, increases and decreases are planned, their net impact on the budget, and their anticipated impact on the instructional program. And if you could just, Eric, you just answered some of them. Megan, obviously, you're going to answer some of them. If you could just also, when you're speaking about that, could you discuss which of these reductions will lead to a change in the student experience, if any?
Yeah. Yep, that's great. So in terms of, as Eric and Drew just referenced, we are having overall district-wide, it will be a decrease of 7.5 FTE positions, but that includes the 2 positions they just referenced. One in the 12-1 class moving to the high school will be an additional special education teacher, and at the middle school, the 8-1 to 2 class is moving there. So that will be an additional. We have some at the elementary level today on March 17th, we have the collapse of an elementary section just due to enrollment. And so that would require 2 less teachers, one being a general ed teacher and one being an ICT class. So those are changes that, again, wouldn't impact the student experience in that way. We are also looking at our elementary coordinator, our ELA coordinator, through attrition. She's retiring, and so we wouldn't be replacing that position. And I know Edgar's working with his team to indicate what that would look like going forward in terms of support. Those coordinators obviously support teachers district-wide, elementary-wide, and again, probably most students wouldn't necessarily feel that impact or that direct impact, but obviously we know we want to make some adjustments in that program as well. There are a number of efficiencies that we're looking at in terms of scheduling. And so again, for students, it wouldn't impact their day-to-day, but looking at a reduction of a 0.4 in K-12 art, as well as a 0.6 world language. And that really, the world language is really related to enrollment, particularly in French. Between 6th and 12th grade, that's been a steady decline in French over time, and so we're looking at some efficiencies there to work with our two buildings. A 0.5 high school math reduction, and that probably would impact class sizes slightly for some of our high school students, but not in terms of their choice of courses. There will be a high school technology support through a resignation, so that'll be a decrease of 1 FTE. Meredith Dutra is retiring coming up, and I think not retiring, resigning. Sorry, she's going on to a new position, so the high school is working on how we would support the faculty really in that particular role. And then our database manager, which is currently open. We wouldn't be filling that going forward next year. And again, these are things that we're working, Jeannie and her team are working on how we would support. Mostly that's an administrative position, so students probably, again, wouldn't necessarily have that direct impact. So those are, we really try to, when we're looking at where these reductions are happening, to limit impact on students, knowing we're a system and we value everyone and all positions matter, but obviously trying to stay away from what would impact students directly.
Thank you. I wanted to follow up just with a couple of them. The 0.5 FTE in math. I know at the beginning of the budget process, you wanted to add a 0.5 FTE in math. Now you reach, is this negative 0.5? You no longer have that extra 0.5 half ask, and then you're additionally reducing it by 0.5. So that 0.5, as far as I'm aware, you're no longer going to be teaching in person the multivariable math class. And I think you would want to add it because there were, as you said, the stats sections were getting very large. So that's something. But you don't think it's going to affect choice, student choice. I think you're going to eliminate 2 unspecified teaching positions through attrition. I don't know if you could speak more about that. And then I know there's a $226,000 reduction in teacher aid hours. Will that affect the student experience?
So the 2 teaching positions, we're just not there yet in terms of having those public conversations. And as a administrative team, we've been working through some of those. Again, limiting impact on students. So we will update you as soon as we're in a position where we'll be able to. In terms of our teacher aide position, in working with our elementary, particularly our assistant principals, do a lot of the scheduling with our teacher aides. And so we're looking at efficiencies and possibly not necessarily a person, but reducing an individual's hours over the course of their week, and looking at where, in terms of lunch supervision, which we know we have a lot of our support from our teacher aides. How can we work to efficiently staff those areas? And those are things that we're still ongoing in terms of our conversations with our elementary team.
I know in a special education, you're projecting 4 to 11 additional FTEs in the next, was that 5 years? Do you have any estimate of where we'll fall in that? It's a kind of big range, and obviously much harder to fund 11 FTEs than 4.
So that's last year's number. So I think it's important before we talk about staffing projections for special education, there's really 2 different conversations happening in special education. The first we've just talked about, which is the special class expansion, and that is 3 FTEs over the next 5 years to complete the 8-to-1 and the 12-to-1 all the way through 12th grade. Those are cost saving programs. So in other words, they save the district money by having our kids in rather than out. So I want to and they're included in that larger number. I think that is, from a financial sustainability standpoint, kind of an easy choice to make. It's both pedagogically and financially more sustainable than using out of district programming. The second conversation is about ICT, or integrated co-teaching. We have built an excellent ICT program on the elementary level, and it is moving currently through the middle school. That is where students, instead of getting pulled out for their services, are have the support of a special education teacher within a general education classroom. We maintain at minimum a 60-40 ratio of regular education and special education students, maintain all of the regular class caps, depending on what grade they are in. In December, we did a presentation on special education, and we've seen the proficiency rates on state tests and STAR really greatly increase for our special education students since the start of this program. So I would encourage you to take a look at that December board meeting to take a look at that. We have found it to be very beneficial for students. And we are currently expanding that in the middle school. Eventually, we would like to put an ICT program into our high school, which does not have one currently. We have a skills level program. Our kids are achieving wonderfully in the high school. This would really be an increase in the student experience by giving students more access to higher level curriculum, giving students the opportunity to be in classes that are supported more globally throughout the day. But that is not the timeline that is on the board presentation we gave is kind of the ideal timeline when we would be able to expand those programs, not when we have to expand those programs. I do believe there'll be somewhere between 2 and 3 FTEs needed if we move that through to the end of high school. So those are a separate conversation. Those do not represent a savings for the district, because ICT is an expensive program, as opposed to the special class conversation that we've been having in this year's budget. So keeping those separate is important. As we move forward, though, if we look to move those ICT programs up and into the high school and in the additional subjects in middle school, those would be conversations about increasing expenses in that area.
Thank you. I see we're getting late on time, so I'm going to skip some of the easy ones. Capital projects, the only other one is the turf field, the main one, right? That you're going to be putting in at the high school, besides the playgrounds. Practice turf field, right, at the high school. I asked about other significant facilities, expenses, and upgrades, and I just wanted to note that one of the budget cuts was $100K facilities contract reduction. How will that affect, our buildings are old. How will that affect our buildings?
So that was a reduction, I believe, from an requested increase in the facilities department. The facilities department has experienced greatly the impacts of inflation, right? So we will continue to prioritize the work that gets done by our maintenance facility staff in the budget with either our own staff or with contracted services. We're just going to see more of the lower priority projects get completed in a given year just because of the prioritization of dollars across the district. So an example of those would be window hardware replacement, where the springs of a double hung window have gone bad and we need to replace that. Rather than taking the opportunity to replace all the windows in that room, we're just going to address the one window that has a safety concern at this point and leave the other windows kind of to a later project.
Yep, thanks. That's helpful. Maybe just for the people here, just give a very brief status of the auditorium bond project. I know we can bond that now, and then also give a very brief overview of the proposed bond for people who haven't been following.
So I'll do the auditorium, and then maybe you want to talk about the pond. So the auditorium project is really, really close. We're really excited to see all of the seats are in, the wood paneling, the sound panels, the stage floor is being replaced. So we're really, really down to the last few items, waiting for the curtains to be delivered and installed. The handicap lift in the back of the auditorium, back of the stage, will be put in the next couple of weeks. So we expect that for Jabberfest in April, that the students will get the first real kind of live look at the auditorium, and it's beautiful. It's really exciting. So we're happy about that. We'll also have in some of our budget mailings, I think we'll have some nice pictures for the community to see that before they can get in there themselves. So that'll be great. And that project, it's anticipated that the final punch list items and the work with contractors will likely kind of spill into the after the auditorium has opened and some items are being cleaned up at the end. So all of our final expenses will be paid likely over the summer, and that will allow us to be able to bond for this in the fall, and we'll get our definitive kind of debt stream for the bond at that point.
In terms of longer term capital projects, we're excited to start this week with our first district-wide capital project steering committee, about 30 people, multi-stakeholder group to work with our architects and construction management team to learn about the district and then look at what the range of possible projects are and ultimately narrow down a list of potential projects that could be considered by the Board of Education for a bond. The timing of that was, but we set this process up to enable us to coordinate the timing of a possible bond with when debt is falling off of the budget due to prior projects being paid off. So the timing of that is during the 2027-28 school year. So you have to work backwards from that for how long it takes projects to get approved, and then backwards from that to when you would ultimately go out to the community to ask them for support for a bond. So we've set this up so the earliest we would potentially ask the community to weigh in would be a year from now. So there's a lot of work ahead starting this Thursday with the construction capital projects steering committee. There's about $40 million of debt space, if you will, based on the debt service portion of the budget that would be tax neutral. And that's, just sort of a guidepost along the way in thinking about what the community might want for schools. Just to be clear, that committee has representation across all parts of the community, 5 at-large community members, representatives from each building, Board of Education members, district administration, and a student, high school student.
And faculty. Yeah.
Given time, I want to skip to question 21, which is please discuss proposed changes to the high school team's athletics budget, the rationales, and generally how those funding decisions are made in comparison to the funding of non-athletic high school extracurricular activities and interscholastic non-athletic competitions.
So can you clarify this question? Is this about the non-sanctioned sports piece of it, or?
That, but just their activities as well. Why do we certain activities versus other activities just within sports?
Okay. Yeah, I think there could be like a deep philosophical answer to that that I'm not I'd have to think more about. In both cases of interscholastic athletics and extracurricular activities, the major cost to the district is the adults who work with those activities. So it's obviously our coaches when we're talking about interscholastic sports, and then our club advisors when it comes to those types of activities. Both of these types of activities, athletics and extracurriculars, are district supported, contractually identified in the teacher's contract for middle school and high school primarily. Our PTA partners do most of the extracurricular programming at the elementary level through after school clubs. There are some teacher-led activities at the elementary school as well. But, largely we've tried to respond to student desire, particularly in the extracurriculars, but more recently in the athletics as well. So there's a process by which students can advocate for the establishment of a club. And there's a process, sort of a period of time where that club is in almost a probationary period where it's being monitored for interest and so on before it might become a permanent fixture or a relatively semi-permanent fixture with a designated advisor and so forth. That's a similar process that students have used in recent years to come forward, and why we have additional non-sanctioned sports like crew and fencing, squash, dance, and ultimate frisbee. Those things sort of came through that way. Our major expenses, the athletics is different from most clubs, not all clubs, but in that they operate around a regional framework, sections, and then there are costs associated with that. And then, of course, major transportation costs that enable us to get our teams to play other teams. So there's definitely a larger budget that goes to athletics than extracurriculars, primarily because of that structure. I don't know if that's what you were getting at, but okay.
And the division between sanctioned and non-sanctioned, why?
So so admittedly, to an athlete, that's probably a distinction without a difference, to be honest. For us, the non-sanctioned sports don't have a built-in framework for competition that is part of the public high school athletic association. So those sports that I mentioned, there aren't necessarily, there's not a league that is made up of all public schools. There isn't an infrastructure that works to get officials and referees and certify and qualify those officials and referees. That's all for these non-sanctioned sport. That's all work that has to be done individually by each school to find competition that can be variable, can be, for the case of crew, that's all really handled by a rowing club that is a 365-day-a-year operation. And we have a contract with that rowing club to send our kids to, and they sort of run that, which is totally different than any other really sport that we do.
I want to just thank you and give anyone here an opportunity, or online, an opportunity to ask questions of all the lovely district people that are here. Debbie, do you want to?
Oh, I'll just speak loud.
And I just, so people can hear, Debbie asked about the progression of the multivariable calculus class over the last 2 years, and beginning it and ending it and going forward.
So our budget process works around the idea that the buildings come forward with their requests and their interests. I think with multivariable calculus, there was a confluence of two things last year that looked a little different than maybe previous years. One was there seemed to be a larger number of students than in prior years. We've long ran this multivariable calculus as like a sort of a quasi-independent study. There's a staff member who's designated to support students as they work through an online program. So really for well over, I think, 12 years, we had that in place. There was, I think, a moment of desire. Maybe it seemed like a few more students than in the past, and a teacher really motivated to teach the course, super talented educator. And so we brought it forward as an idea that we thought made sense at the time. I think the ultimate enrollment was back under 10 students from, it wasn't as high as we had initially anticipated. And given that, and given the fact that it was admittedly not ideal, but perhaps adequate in the past, we decided that was a place to return to, that the long-term norm probably was that way for a reason. And that's our best thinking at the moment.
Do the kids pay to take that online course? So at what expense? can there, again, I don't know what the difference is between taking the online versus having a teacher teach it, but could parents pay the fee to help subsidize the teacher?
And just briefly, Jenny's asking about whether we could go back and forth between linear algebra and the multivariable course. How many kids were taking linear algebra, and instead of the kids paying the fee, could parents pay to have the multivariable class?
And I'll have to get back to you on that. Yeah, I have the enrollment data, but it's not at my fingertips right now. We can certainly follow up with you on that.
Does anyone have any other questions? Otherwise, I have more questions. Is there anyone online? I'm not online, so. No one on Zoom? Do you have time for a couple more questions? Oh, well, so I was going to ask you to briefly talk about that for people who don't know.
Yeah, so the EV bus mandate, or sorry, the zero emissions bus mandate still exists in New York State, and we are progressing towards that. So you may recall that we received $800,000 from the EPA to help offset the cost of purchasing our buses. That left us with an open question on A, how to fund the balance of those buses, and then B, how to charge those vehicles going forward. This year, with the funds available in our transportation equipment line for a large school bus, we were able to buy or issue the purchase order for one large EV bus, supplemented by both the EPA funding of $200,000 and NYSERDA money for $100,000. And in next year's transportation equipment line, we've got funding set aside for 3 more EV buses to fully utilize the EPA funding. We also partnered with a firm called Highland Electric Fleets to do our transportation study, and they outlined for us a phased rollout of charging infrastructure to complete the electrification of the entire 80 vehicle or so fleet. In this budget, we are including 6 months of an 8-year total agreement to install the charging infrastructure and the chargers, as well as provide the electricity and the training and the charging management software and oversight for the 4 vehicles that we're purchasing through an agreement with Highland Electric Fleets, where they will kind of run the entire charging infrastructure for us, make sure that everything's installed appropriately, handle all of the coordination with municipal entities as well as the state education department to get the construction completed. We will be then paying on a semi-annual basis a fee for each of the 4 buses for 8 years. That'll be articulated clearly in our budget book as well as in our other mailings around the budget this year. This commits us to an 8-year agreement with Highland Fleets for those 4 vehicles, but it does not kind of bind us to, as we look at rolling out the rest of our electric fleet, utilizing their agreement. We could still take an assessment on an annual basis to say, is this working for us or is it not? And take another approach, such as doing the infrastructure ourselves and buying all the charging infrastructure ourselves. So I just wanted to articulate that because it's an important piece of how we will eventually obtain state aid on this infrastructure, which is important. Just to articulate, it is an 8-year agreement with Highland Fleet that will be charged on a 6-month basis.
Sure. Just real quick on the enrollment in linear algebra, it's 39 students across 2 sections. So it's quite a difference in enrollment there.
Right, because linear algebra doesn't have the prerequisites that multivariable calculus has. And our math program, as it's currently constituted, doesn't take you to multivariable calculus. It takes you just to calculus BC. Yeah. So unless you take an outside class, you won't get there. Yeah. Briefly, DEIB work, is that part of this budget?
I don't know if Edgar, do you want to were you able to hear that?
Sure, yeah, I did hear it. So while we don't have a district-wide DEI consultant in next year's budget, we're going to continue to be responsive to the belonging survey and the work in equity and use funds across various budget lines to support inclusive environments. For example, we'll direct textbook funds to purchase resources that reflect our diverse population and continue to engage multiple perspectives. And our work on belonging will also inform both program improvement work and professional development.
Great. And then just one more question, safety and security. I know we're planning to fund at least some door ajar sensors and cameras in this budget. Are there any previously identified safety measures that are being deferred to next year?
This year's budget actually has some restored monies in the SSEM budget that were lowered last year. This year, we are planning to start the door ajar sensors work in all of our buildings by identifying priority doors and putting in the hardware that is required to run the system of sensors. And our expectation is over the next few years, much like the cameras, setting aside a regular amount of funds to upkeep and expand both the cameras and the door ajar sensor systems. Each budget and the amount of funds that we can put towards that are obviously dependent on the budget. They're also a little bit dependent on the current system and how many repairs are needed for those. But it is, we're looking to treat it as an ongoing improvement project rather than a one-time large capital investiture.
I'll just add that in the facilities capital expenditure category, you'll note that there's an additional amount of funding associated with both the high school and the Fox Meadow projects to do some interior work, building work. And we may include some door hardening and door jar sensors in that project. Again, having those building interior projects help us gain some state aid on those exterior site projects.
Okay, thank you. Any other questions? I know you've already stayed past your designated 1 hour. All right, well, thank you so much for taking the time to come speak to us today. I think it was really helpful to learn a little bit more about the budget. Thank you.